Well, my grandpa ran a gold mine for the last 20 or 30 years, so I just grew up on the mine site with him and screwing around, riding motorcycles, learning how to run equipment.
At just 22 years old, Parker Schnabel was risking $20 million with no backup plan. There was no one to fall back on, no second chance waiting in the background, just pressure that kept building with every single day. And while millions of people watched him on Gold Rush, thinking he was living the dream, they never saw what it was actually costing him behind the scenes. Because this wasn't just about chasing gold. It was about the relationships he slowly lost, the pressure he carried in silence, and the moments he had to show up on camera, pretending everything was fine when it really wasn't. So what really happened to Parker Schnabel? And how much did success quietly take from him? Running a $1 million mining operation at a young age. Gold Rush has been running long enough that most of the current audience knows Parker Schnabel as a confident, experienced mine boss with a $10 million net worth and a track record that most professional miners twice his age would envy. What is easy to forget is how young he was when all of it started and what it means to carry that kind of responsibility at that age. He was 16 years old when his grandfather, John Schnabel, handed him the keys to the Big Nugget mine at Porcupine Creek in Alaska. Most 16-year-olds at that time were worrying about exams. Parker was worrying about ground conditions, water management, and whether the equipment would hold together long enough to justify the season. The mine had been his grandfather's life's work. John Schnabel had bought the claim in 1984 at the age of 68, following doctor's orders to stay active after triple bypass heart surgery. He had turned it from a leisure project into a legitimate gold mining operation across more than 2 decades of work. When he handed it to Parker, he was not giving him a hobby. He was giving him a responsibility that carried the weight of his own legacy, his own decades of labor, and his own name. Parker told a journalist, "I always wanted to follow in his footsteps, and that desire was real enough that he dropped out of college after 1 semester to go back to Alaska and mine." The conventional path, the path most people his age were on, was abandoned in the space of a single semester because his grandfather needed him at the mine. The Gold Rush cameras arrived in 2011 when Parker was 17, which means the audience watched him grow up in real time in a way that very few reality television formats actually capture. They watched him make mistakes. They watched him take risks that made his crew nervous. They watched him push equipment, budgets, and timelines past what most experienced miners would have considered sensible. And they watched the results come in, season after season. Gold totals that kept climbing, records that kept being broken, and a young man building something even the skeptics could not dismiss. He pulled 1,029 ounces in Season 5. He chased 5,000 ounces in Season 7 and came close enough to shock people who had written the target off as fantasy. He was making more money from gold mining before he was 25 than most people make in a decade of conventional employment. But the cameras also captured the price he had to pay for such success. The exhaustion that lives in someone's face when they have been pushing 12-hour days in sub-zero conditions for months on end. The specific tension that comes from being the youngest person in the room and also the person everyone is waiting on to make the call. The moments when equipment broke down at the worst possible time and the entire season's outcome hung in the balance, with decisions that had to be made in the next 10 minutes. The pressure was real, it was constant, and it sat entirely on the shoulders of someone who was still, by almost any reasonable standard, a kid. Then, in March 2016, the one person who had always been the foundation of everything he had built was gone. And the timing was one of the cruelest things the show ever put on screen. Burying his grandfather. John Schnabel died on March 18, 2016, in Oakland, California, at the age of 96 from congestive heart failure. He had survived a heart attack during the show's second season, been diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2013, and kept going anyway, still active at the mine at 93. His death at the end of season 6 was not a surprise in the clinical sense. He had been 96 years old and had been in declining health. But knowing something is coming does not always prepare you for the specific weight of it when it actually arrives. The timing of his death relative to Parker's personal life created a convergence of loss that the show's audience only partially understood at the time. Parker had met Ashley Yule, an Australian veterinary nurse, while visiting Australia in 2016. He brought her to North America to be part of his world, to spend the season with him, to become part of the life he was building in the Yukon. And in her first week in North America, Parker was burying his grandfather. He said it himself, directly on camera, during the Gold Rush companion show, The Dirt. Her first week in North America, I was burying my grandpa. That sentence, delivered with the specific flatness of someone who has processed something too big to be fully processed, is the most honest thing Parker Schnabel has ever said on camera about what that period actually felt like. John Schnabel is survived by his wife, Irma, his daughters, his son, Roger, and his grandsons, Parker and Payson. His producer, Ed Gorsuch, called him America's grandpa, saying he was an Alaskan to the core, that his experience, wisdom, and demeanor were all they could want, and that when they met Parker, they had a story. That framing is worth sitting with. The story of Gold Rush, in its truest form, is not a story about gold. It is a story about a grandfather, a grandson, and about what gets passed from one person to another when the older generation trusts the younger one enough to hand everything over. John Schnabel gave Parker the mine when Parker was 16. Parker has spent the last 15 years since proving that the trust was justified. But proving the trust was justified does not fill the absence of the person who gave it. That is the grief that runs underneath everything else in this story. It went in during season 6, and it has never fully come back out. His grandfather's absence also removed the one relationship in his professional life that was truly equal in terms of knowledge and experience. John Schnabel was not just family. He was the only person in Parker's world who had genuinely been through everything that Parker was going through and could speak to it from the other side. The older miners on the show, Tony Beets in particular, were mentors, colleagues, and competitors. But the grandfather relationship was something categorically different. Losing it at 22, in the middle of a season, while trying to simultaneously introduce a new girlfriend to your entire world, is not a manageable combination of stresses. Parker managed it anyway, but he managed it the only way he knew how, by driving harder into the work and leaving the rest of it largely unattended. And then, 2 years later, the unattended things caught up with him in the most public possible way. The breakup he called a personal failure. Ashley Yule appeared in seasons 7 and 8 of Gold Rush as Parker's girlfriend, and for a significant portion of the audience that became invested in their relationship, she felt like the person who softened the edges of someone who had always been, by his own admission, moody, surly, and difficult to be around when things were not going well. She worked in the Gold Room alongside Chris Dumit, who has spoken about how much her sunny personality changed the atmosphere of the claim. She adapted to mining camp life, to the specific rhythms and physical demands of the Yukon summer, to being in a relationship that existed largely in the public eye because her boyfriend was on a reality television show. She lasted 2 seasons. In the season 9 opener, titled Win Big or Die Trying, Parker announced the split publicly on camera. What he said about it, and more specifically how he said it, was revealing in ways that went beyond the standard reality television breakup announcement. He did not blame Ashley or point to outside circumstances. He said that he had not made the relationship a priority, that she could do better, and it was a personal failure. He also confirmed on The Dirt that there were a lot of undealt with issues in his head during that period, issues that the work had been holding at bay, but that were still there underneath the surface, shaping how available he was able to be to anyone who needed more than what he was capable of giving at the time. His grandfather's death, the grief that had gone in and not come back out, the specific weight of carrying a legacy that was now entirely his, with no one left to share it with who had known it before he did. All of it sitting there, unprocessed, while he ran an operation and broke records and looked fine on camera. "I don't think I was in a very good place emotionally last year," he said. The year his grandfather died was the year Ashley arrived. The relationship formed in the shadow of grief, and they tried to survive inside a lifestyle that left almost no room for anything that was not directly connected to the mine. What happened to Ashley after the breakup is its own kind of honest footnote. She scrubbed every trace of her time in the Klondike from her social media. Every photo of Parker, every image from Alaska, and every piece of evidence that this chapter of her life had existed were deleted. She returned to Australia, built her own life, eventually entered into a relationship with someone named Mitch Baker, and continued her veterinary career. She never made a public statement about the breakup. Parker's account is the only one in the public record because Ashley chose not to put hers there, which is itself a kind of dignity the situation deserved but rarely gets in the television world she briefly inhabited. The mine kept running, but the broader pattern of what the life he had chosen was doing to his ability to build anything lasting away from the Yukon became something he started talking about with an honesty that most people on reality television never manage. The loneliness nobody films. Parker Schnabel has a quality that is genuinely unusual among reality television personalities of his level of fame. He tells the truth about the cost of what he does. He has spoken in multiple interviews about the structural impossibility of the life he leads from the perspective of building something with another person. He spends months at a time in remote northern wilderness with a crew that is almost entirely middle-aged men. The mine is everything from the moment the season starts to the moment it ends. And then in the off-season, he is doing the planning and the logistics for the next season while also trying to be a normal human being in the gaps that remain. He once said he spends most of his year with middle-aged men pretty much all year. That observation was delivered as a joke, but it contained a real description of what the isolation of life actually looked like. Todd Hoffman, who ran his own mining operation on the show for many seasons, has said publicly that the 6 months away from home each year destroyed marriages and relationships with a regularity that everyone in the world knew about, but nobody talked about enough. Parker does not have a marriage to destroy. He has never allowed himself to get that far. But the relationship he did build with Ashley was destroyed by the same forces that Todd was describing. A lifestyle that demands everything and leaves very little in reserve for the person who is waiting for you to come back. So, what does that career look like now, in 2026? And what is Parker Schnabel actually building at 31? Still digging at 31. Parker Schnabel is one of the most successful miners in the history of Gold Rush by every measurable standard. His cumulative gold totals across 15 seasons place him at the top of the show's production leaderboard. His net worth is estimated at approximately $10 million. In the most recent seasons of the show, he has moved to operate on the Scribner Creek claim in the Yukon, which he purchased and is developing with the same intensity he brought to every previous operation. Season 15 saw him make a bid for Rick Ness's operation, which caused its own ripple of drama within the show's mining community. He is still competitive, still pushing, and still the person on set who arrives earliest and leaves last, pushing the hardest and taking it most personally when the season does not produce what he planned for it to produce. But the season 15 episode that gave the clearest picture of where Parker Schnabel actually stands was not about gold totals, equipment purchases, or business moves. It was the episode where a major equipment breakdown threatened to cost him millions at the worst possible moment in the season. The specific description from that episode was a nightmare breakdown that could cost him millions, and the way the crew described his reaction to it was instructive. He did not explode. He simply assessed the situation in silence and made calls to fix it. The man who used to be described by his own crew as a hothead, who would jump down people's throats when things broke down, is now someone who thinks before he speaks, even when everything is going wrong at once. His grandfather used to coach him from the sidelines about being kinder to others. It took years of getting it wrong before the coaching took hold, but it did take hold. He has spoken in recent seasons about the things he wants that the mine cannot give him. A family, eventually. A relationship that actually works, rather than one that dies in the shadow of the work, because he never learned to make room for both at the same time. He is 31 now, and the question of whether he has figured out how to want two things at the same time, a mine and a life alongside it, is one that the cameras can follow him asking, but cannot answer for him. That answer belongs to the off-season, the part that the cameras do not cover, the part where Parker Schnabel is just a person in his early 30s trying to figure out what he actually wants the rest of his life to look like. What is genuinely heartbreaking about Parker Schnabel at 31 is not any single event. It is the accumulation. The grandfather who taught him everything died before he was 22. The grief that went in during the middle of a mining season and came back out in pieces across the years that followed. The relationship he described as a personal failure because he had prioritized everything else and nothing was left for the person he was supposed to be building a life with. The structural isolation that is baked into every season from the first day of ground preparation to the last weigh-in before the freeze. The pressure of being responsible for crews who depend on him, and equipment that can fail, and seasons that can go wrong in ways that cost everyone involved. And the specific loneliness of someone who has been famous for being good at something since he was 16 years old and has spent the years since trying to figure out who he is when the cameras are off and the gold scales are put away. He is still mining, still the person his grandfather believed in enough to hand the keys over when Parker was barely old enough to hold them. And he is 31 years old, which means he has more of this ahead of him than behind him, which is both the hopeful version and the part that makes everything that has already happened feel heavier rather than lighter. The mine will always be there. The question is, what else, over the next 30 years of his life, he manages to build alongside it? The fans who have followed Gold Rush since Parker was 17 have watched something that television rarely gets right: the unedited arc of a real person becoming who they are. They watched him be difficult, driven, and occasionally cruel to people who did not deserve it. They watched him lose his grandfather and keep going. They watched him take full responsibility for a relationship he let fall apart. They watched him grow into someone his crew describes as a changed man. None of that growth was smooth, dramatic, or packaged for easy consumption. It was messy, slow, and sometimes painful to witness. That is what a person actually looks like as they become themselves. And at 31, Parker Schnabel is still very much in the middle of that process. Do you think Parker Schnabel will ever find the balance between the mine and a personal life that actually works? And looking back at everything he has been through, which moment in his gold rush story do you think changed him the most? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.